after the Second World War, major sort of reconstruction, demobilization, people resetting themselves after the massive dislocation of the Second World War. By around the mid-50s, things started to get back on track. And this is a graphic showing UK real house price data from 1955 and US house price data from mid-70s. The cycle reasserts itself. So things generally expand, and then a massive headlong land boom into the peak in 73, and then a very significant recession in the UK that is now blamed on the oil shock, but actually was indeed a land-led recession, and very severe for the UK. In fact, we had to go to the IMF to get a bailout in 1977. In fact, it's said that the IMF was searching for a role after the reconstruction of Europe and after the closing of the gold window, and the UK presented its opportunity, and so the IMF playbook was honed by imposing public austerity and all the rest of it on the UK taxpayer, the UK public services, and it's a playbook that is obviously repeated ever since. Anyway, after the late 70s, Thatcher was elected in 81. Things got back on a somewhat regular rhythm, and again we had a land boom into 89, 90, and you were starting to see that not only was this pattern visible in the UK and the US, but also in Nordic countries, and most famously with the real estate boom in Japan into the peak in 1990s, which was so severe that this is the reason Japan has spent the last 2 decades trying to sort itself out, because the bust was so significant. In the UK and the US, we spent the early 90s trying to sort out the mess of the previous cycle. It was a very formative time for me. This was when I first really got to understand that economies don't just grow, they actually have recessions. My father's business almost closed because banks had pulled credits from it. Eventually things were okay, and by the late 90s we were getting back to pretty expanding economy. Things were looking good. We had the major boom of the 2000s into the peak in 2006, 2007, and after that the financial crisis, and more countries displaying the same rhythm of land boom and then bust. Now, if land is not part of your economic models, and this is why it was important to go through the history, if land is not part of your economic models, how can you even conceive of a land cycle which affects all of these other variables in an economy? It's just not possible. You lack the analytical foundation.